Hello, welcome back to the Momentum Podcast. And this week we have a consultant from the field to interview, asking questions about her practice, about how she lives out her values in consulting. So this week we have founder of McKusker Consulting, Jennifer McKusker. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome. So on your website, McKuskerConsulting.com, you talk about being a boundary pusher, a rule breaker, and you have years of experience being this person, right? Living this out in the workplace, helping organizations to shift maybe their definitions of success, who they are. And your title is Disruptive Talent Strategy and Design. Talk us through that. What does disruption mean? Is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? How did you get to be that as like who you are as a consultant?
Yeah. So somehow it's sort of innate to who I am. I'm a questioner, right?
Oh, I love that.
Challenging the reason that we're doing things, and I want to dig deeper. I want to understand, but what was behind that? Are we doing that because we've always done it, or is that the right thing to do? And is there a different way? And have we really vetted that out? And I've just sort of naturally always been that way, that sort of curious person around process and programs and things like that. And so it came pretty naturally to me when I kind of left grad school and entered the business world I found myself doing that in business. And I think your question around, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Early on, I really questioned that about myself, right? Yeah. Like, why do I do this? Why am I and even why am I drawn to take jobs where it's where it's more difficult, where I'm having to really dig in and challenge things and build and not take the easy route. Like, what is it about me? Like, why do I do that? And so through my experiences and through my own just journey of self-discovery through my work, right?
Wow.
I remember the moment when I was driving one day, and I remember having this insight. I had that moment, that aha moment, where I'm like, no, it is a good thing, and that's who I am. That's my purpose. Yes. And I actually add value in companies by being that person. And so it was that moment that I doubled down on it, right? And said, no, this is the value I bring. It's why companies should bring me in. And so here you go.
So it's something that you maybe saw, hey, I'm different in this area.
Yeah.
Other people aren't asking difficult questions. Other people aren't really. Maybe other people are more satisfied with status quo. I'm different. I can either pretend I don't have that part of me, or I can really lean into that as a distinctive factor of who I am.
Yeah. And, I'm sure I've come across people that are also challenging, right? I don't think there's enough of it, though. And the funny thing is that I'm not sure all managers or all leaders like having someone like me on their team, right?
Nope.
No. And so that's always been that thing where I go right up to the line, right?
Yeah.
And my toes are across the line, but my whole foot's not,
Oh my gosh, I can so relate to that.
I've just been the person, and I've even had that feedback in my career. Like, you are difficult to manage, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but don't you want someone who's challenging you and who's bringing fresh thought and perspective and all of that? And so I think the idea of wanting that is so different than the reality of having it. And honestly, I'm so thrilled to finally be making sort of this shift and debut into consulting, because I actually think that is what companies want consultants to do. That's what they hire them to do.
So reflecting since that moment, what fruit have you seen since that revolution?
Of the revolution of that I'm supposed to be disruptive, or going into consulting?
Right, because it was this, hey, I asked difficult questions, I changed things.
Yeah.
I don't know if I fully want to own that. And then you had this moment, you talked about this aha moment that you're like, no, this is who I am. I'm made to do this. I'm designed for this. Now how can I live out that purpose? What's the fruit since you said, I'm not going to run from this anymore?
Yeah, I think what happened in that moment is this entire shift of, I'm actually not going to fight that anymore. I'm going to own it and double down on it, right? And so what happened is I showed up as I'm confident in my, this confidence in my approach and confidence in in that this is value added, right? And so I think that when I crossed that chasm of having confidence in that being my intention and how I add value, I was able to be challenging with the executives, and and really view myself as sort of one of the executive suite, even though there was maybe a status difference between us or hierarchical difference between us. And
so when you're coaching or consulting now, you don't hold back.
Challenge them, and not hold back. And honestly, that played out. That what that does is, I think people at that level, especially, they don't get that a lot, right?
Everyone's afraid of them. They want to keep their job.
People want to tell them what they think they want to hear. Yeah. And so I won't do that. And so it's sort of refreshing, right? So that sort of, I think in a weird way, a lot of people liked it,
and that goes against stereotypical gender roles too, right? When you walk in the room and people are like, "Oh, she's a nice woman," and then,
could be. And you're like, "Nope, so, I'm gonna push you."
I love that,
and I'm not gonna let you off the hook, right?
I love that. How so many of my clients and students wrestle with imposter syndrome. That when they walk in, if they are with a group of executives, they're like, I don't belong here. But you've chosen to flip that and say, no, I'm going to be who I am. I'm going to be disruptive, regardless of what they think my role should be. How have you conquered that fear of this, like, should be versus am?
Yeah. It's a challenge. Don't get me wrong. Like I'm presenting it like I've, so centered, and I'm,
I appreciate that in the process, but you're certainly, you're not at zero.
A process, right? And so there's always a little bit of that. Sometimes you're, especially, I think I was able to really own it internally because I understood the way internal worked, and the business dynamics, and and how I could really get into business strategy and things like that. And now shifting from internal to external after, 20 plus years of really understanding how it works internally, I feel in some ways I'm very confident in my ability and the skill, but there is this imposter syndrome of like, okay, but I'm coming from a different perspective. Right. Yeah. And I haven't necessarily built that knowledge of your specific company and your specific, industry, even though I've been in a lot of industries and a lot of companies. Right. And so I have to continuously remind myself that I have done this before, and I do add value, and you have to continue to tell your own narrative to yourself in order to overcome that.
So you have experience in Fortune 500 companies such as Taco Bell, New Century Mortgage, Pacific Sunwear, Oakley, and Blizzard Entertainment. Are you a different person when you flipped from internal to external?
Am I a different person? I don't think I'm a different person. Yeah. I think I am who I am, and I think I've owned that. And that was that moment of insight where I gained that, that next level of confidence that really, pushed me in my career. But I think that there is a part of going external that requires this business development side that I haven't totally had. I haven't had to do that before, right? And so there's this element of tapping into this area that I'm not as confident in because I haven't really honed that skill, and I don't know if it's there or not. Yeah. And so it's not that I'm a different person. It's just that I'm having to flex muscles that are weak.
Yeah. I'd love to hear more about that, because you have your PhD in organizational psychology. People in our field in IO, a question often when we go to our conferences, right? Our annual conference SIOP, they ask, are you internal, external? Or are you I, are you O? So many of students or, people entering our field really I find many of my students have this question, this dichotomy that they think you have to choose between I and O, and they think you have to choose between internal, external. I obviously have some thoughts about that, but you're the practitioner. You're the one that's lived on both of those sides, like 100% on both. So what advice would you have to people considering that? Like, okay, which one do I choose?
Yeah. What's super interesting, it's kind of funny about this question is that because I really have been internal for so far in my career, I I have had this funny perspective about externals, and that I'm having to sort of shift my mindset around. But it as being sort of salesy and all of that, right? And like, oh, they'll do anything to, and now I'm like, no, you don't have to be that way. You don't have to be that way, right? You actually can get by on and really build relationships in a very authentic way, right? And I think for me, making that shift it had a lot to do with leveraging relationships that I created internal. But the thing that I always thought was interesting about externals when I was internal is people who had only been external that tried to then make the shift internal. The skills and patterns of behavior that made them successful externally are not always the same skills and patterns of behavior that make you successful internally. Yeah. And so these long stints that you go, which I am one of them now, right? And after that long stint making the shift, that I think sometimes is challenging. You have to relearn and take the road less traveled and rewire your brain a little bit and like reconnect, or connect new neurons. And so I'm having to do that the opposite way.
Yeah.
Where you don't have the security and this, quote unquote security and safety, right? Of the team and, and the relationships internally. And so I need to shake what made me successful behave, sort of from a behavior pattern internally and figure out how can I take the best of that and yet pick up these new skills?
What are some of those skills? Because, in my mind, the stereotypical, when we go to our annual conference of people in our field, you can kind of tell who's internal and external. Like, at least like my stereotypes of it's like the well-dressed people, the people that are super charismatic. They like this huge smile, perfect handshake. Yep, they're external. And then the super nerdy people in the corner, like that, okay, they're probably internal. They're running stats behind the scenes. That's our stereotypes. Yeah. Could you unpack that or debunk some of those?
That's funny. I think there are some, there's, every stereotype has a sliver of truth to it, and then a lot that's not true, right? So the interesting thing is, I always viewed, like I said, external as very salesy, right? And like that, the well-dressed, the smiling, like really good at sales, I think one of the things that it's not the skills, but I think one of the things that I learned internal is what worked for me as an internal with external. So when externals would try to, reach out to me or sell me on stuff, like what techniques actually worked and which ones were a turnoff, being someone internal that was being sold all the time by externals, and taking that learning with me as I now shift into external so that I don't come across to internals as that way that's overly pushy and overly, salesy, so that, and really being true to who I am and not trying to take on this persona of what the stereotype of an external is, right? So it's not really skills as much as how you show up, right?
So showing up in authenticity, saying, here's the genuine value I can add. And you can take it or leave it.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of trusting in the power of networks and the quality of your work, and like let that speak for itself, and let sort of informal channels work for you. And so far, I'm only a few months in, but so far that's been effective for me. And maybe that's because I've spent so much time internal building a tremendous number of relationships, and people are now like, oh, you're external, I want to bring you in, right? I haven't had the,
And advice that's been given to me is don't burn any bridges, right?
Yeah. So important.
That if you do, my mom would tell me that growing up, in middle school, she would affirm people in our community that if they left for whatever reasons, said, hey, they're really good at not burning any bridges. They affirm, they leave well. And so obviously you did that in your multiple.
That short moment of, yeah, I got them, when you're walking out the door and you handed it to them and all of that, like that short-term moment of sort of reward that you get is not long-term, right? You have to remember that is very, very short-term, and you have to really, really think about how that plays out in the long term, because even if you don't go external, even if you stay internal, it's a small world, right? Everyone is connected and knows everyone. And so always maintain that.
I appreciate you acknowledging, that we do have that dark side of us. Sometimes we do want to stick it to the man, know?
For sure. Well, listen, I'm disruptive, right? But even coming from this disruptive person, I'm like, take the high road in those instances. That will not serve you well, right?
This long-term orientation.
Yeah.
Let's move to psychological safety. So, on your website, and you have a book, right, that you collaborated on, Psychological Safety. Super powerful topic. The key to happy, high-performing people and teams. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Oh, I love this topic. So it's really the model of the safety model is what is covered in that book, and it's really based on a whole bunch of neuroscience research around kind of what are the motivating factors of our brain. What are the things that really that we crave, right? And so safety is an acronym for security, autonomy, fairness, esteem, and trust, right? So that's the SAFT.
Yeah,
those are the cravings that our brain has, right? And when those are fulfilled for us, we're in kind of a reward or just a good state where we can really access that frontal part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is where all of our executive functioning happens, right? Your thinking, your reason, your perspective taking, your complex problem solving. But when one or more of those are compromised and they've been triggered, then all of a sudden our amygdala and our limbic system, that emotional control center of our brain, fires off, and we start losing access to that executive functioning part of our brain, right? Those parts of our brain are inversely correlated. And so that's when you see people who act out on impulse, right?
Yeah.
And because they're not able to reason and ration around what's happening emotionally for them. So the book is really about, okay, those domains that everyone has. So that's the Y in safety, the U. Every single person has all 5 of those cravings. It cuts across all types of demographics, right?
Yeah.
But the length of your fuse before the dynamite goes off for each one of those is different depending on, how you were brought up and whatever your current context is. And so really understanding that about yourself and about others. And, if you're driven by autonomy, but someone else is driven by fairness in this moment or in this particular exchange, then you should be aware of that to have an effective conversation with people.
So when you're doing coaching and consulting around psychological safety, where do you start?
Oh my gosh, there's so many places. So it depends. So a lot of times what'll happen is a team will bring me in to come talk to them about psychological safety. And so we start with, okay, let's understand it individually, kind of where each of you are at right now, which is fluid over time, right? It's not about your personality. It's about your circumstance and your context, right? And so sometimes we'll do that, and then we'll take that to the next level and say, okay, well, what's the feeling of psychological safety on the team, and then the function and the company, and all of that. Other ways is you might come in and you might say, okay, how do we use the psychological safety and other aspects of neuroscience, right, with mindfulness and bias and all these other amazing research that's out there. How do you use that as a filter along with the culture of the company and then the science as a filter for how you design various aspects of the employee experience? So if I was designing onboarding or my change management process or my performance management process, whatever it is, right? How do you design that with your culture and all this science in mind, right? So it's a sort of you make the organization and the processes that are part of it psychologically safe and make sure that they are true to a lot of the research that's out there. Another is really working with teams on change management. Oh my gosh. Psychological safety is such a big component of that. And so how do you work through transitions with people? with that lens.
So suppose an organization is wanting to do a change management initiative. And I guess it comes to mind with me, maybe they're changing their values. Maybe it's two branches are collaborating or anything, right? New CEO. All of those are examples of change management. How does psychological safety apply to a change management initiative?
So again, it depends on like how big it is and, what the scope of it and all that is. So sometimes it's purely around, okay, let's design this, the outcome. And sometimes it's, hey, how do you actually manage the change? And so what's a brain-friendly way?
Ooh, that's a good phrasing.
Brain-friendly way to actually kick it off, communicate it, what's the whole thing end to end, the change management process that's brain-friendly for people, knowing like how do you minimize the amount of amygdala activity, right? Or the amount of threat that's going to happen through this, knowing that there will be some, right? Because change inevitably is going to evoke some threats for people. And so how do you minimize it though? You're not going to be able to get rid of it, but how do you minimize it? And so I would really work with them on designing the process to be brain friendly.
What are some quick takeaways if I'm leading a team, right? And I mean, name the reason today, right? That there's a dozen reasons that a team could be under stress under today's climate. Social, medical, there's a dozen ways. Maybe the virtual shift even. That psychological safety, like maybe half your team is about ready to flip. Like they're, amygdala's like, okay, I'm switching back to like not thinking logically, the fight or flight mode. Half your team's ready to flip and you have a manager, a half-hour call. Like what's something a manager can do today to like
a half-hour call? Yikes. So if you really understanding that the craving of the brain is security, autonomy, fairness, right? Esteem and trust. If you have that, then taking like maybe one of those even and saying that a lot of times during a change, at least in the beginning phases, sometimes it is about security. So people they're not feeling clear about what the future is or feeling uncertain, right? And today, and with COVID and all of that, right? I mean, there's a lot of security triggers that are happening because there's so much uncertainty, right? And so really honing in on that and talking through like what's going on what's going on in your heads, like and surfacing some of that, and then also giving as much information as you can. A lot of times during change, what managers do, because they either don't have all the information or they're not allowed to share the information. Regardless of whether it's which of those reasons it is, they tend to close themselves off from the team because they don't want to get asked, like, again, what's going on, all of that, because they can't share it or they don't know. And so they're avoiding it. But actually in that time, they need to be as present as they possibly can. Right. And so in that half hour, I would be as present as I can, like taking in all the input, understanding what the concerns are. Are they safety concerns? I mean, are they security concerns? Are they autonomy concerns? Are they fairness concerns? Because then I, as a manager, know, okay, I then can put a plan in place on how I address those. Right. So if I had 30 minutes, I would try to understand, what are if we can name some of the threats that are happening, and then I can map those to which of their domains, like which of the safety motivating factors is being triggered, then we can put a plan in place.
That's awesome. And I appreciate that it's like security, autonomy, fairness, trust. I'm missing the E.
Esteem,
Esteem, trust in you. That acknowledges that there probably aren't quick, easy solutions, but there's a couple generalizable truths that maybe security in this example. Most of us probably have less sense of security during COVID, maybe less sense of trust for our system. Those are things we can open ourselves up to, maybe even be honest. Hey, I don't have the answers as a leader. As soon as I get those, I will deliver them to you. Here's where the blocks are in the system that we don't know what tomorrow will look like. But as soon as I get those, I'm going to deliver them as effectively and clearly to you as an audience as I can.
And acknowledging like, okay, some people are fine working from home and doing all of this, and some people are not. And this has been a struggle for them. And so figuring that out and saying, okay, is what part, what's getting in the way, right? Is it because I don't know how to use the technology very well, or I don't have the space in my apartment or whatever to be able to separate myself from my kids and all of that, or whatever that is. Like, get to the bottom of what is driving it, and then go after it. Like, company, really solve that for each of those individuals, right? It's not about a blanket answer. It's about each individual is responding to this based on their brain wiring,
yes,
their upbringing, their individual context. And so you also need to individualize for their brains.
Yeah. That it's not because someone's an idiot. It's because they're wired a particular way.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. This is really important. And the model, the safety model was, that acronym was put together by the Academy of Brain-Based Leadership. And so one of the things that they say is, it's not them, it's their brain. Right. And so if you can really remember that, then you depersonalize it. Right. It's just about the neural connections. And just because you have a thought that they don't have yet, it's just because they haven't made that insight yet. It doesn't mean they're incapable of it.
That's so
they
good.
just haven't had the experience to make that insight yet.
We tend to moralize many of these things, like they're a bad person if they do this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that it kind of equips us to move away from that language of good or bad and just say, hey, like, the brain isn't ready for this yet. It's not. They're not good or bad.
Exactly.
They're not even like less mature. It's just in this moment, they're not ready for this.
Right. And so how do you get them to that insight or that aha, right? It's asking questions that allows them to have that moment of aha, that moment of insight that you've already had, right? But telling them this is the answer, that doesn't work, right? You have to really engage their brain in the process and allow them to make that neural connection for themselves. Because not only does that create the connection, but when that connection happens, when you see it on their face, that aha moment on their face, that also they get this boost that elicits this excitement and readiness to move forward. Awesome. Right? It's a motivator.
You have, I want to close with a blog you have, Living for Others. In consulting, that's a unique phrase. We don't see many consulting companies like living for others as a language they're using. I want to ask you about that. What does that mean for you? How do you live that out?
Yeah. That particular blog hit me really during this COVID time. And it was really about the fact that it's so important during this time that we put others before ourselves, right? And that we are constantly thinking about the impact that all of us have on each other, instead of protecting ourselves and protecting and protecting our own self-interest. And what's interesting is, like, a lot of times it's not always intentional. Sometimes this is unintentional consequences that we just didn't consider. So, for example, we don't always go into it saying, I'm going to try to trigger you in as many ways as possible, right? Yeah. But rather, in our own, while we're trying to protect ourselves, we inadvertently trigger others. And so if we can just reframe and say, but what is it about them? Like, how do I put them first? How do I put them at the center? And how I can bring value to this world if all of us were in this together, if all of us actually thought about someone else ahead of ourselves, like, what an amazing place this would be, right?
I appreciate that too. You have a quote in the blog too from Pope Francis, right? On the 41st day of quarantine. Do you want to share that with us?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I can read it there. Okay. So you say, just to quote some of your blog, living for others is a rule of nature. We are born to help each other, no matter how difficult it is. Life is good when you're happy, but much better when others are happy because of you. And I appreciate that much better when others are happy because of you, a quote from Pope Francis.
Yeah.
And then you integrate that with science too, from Dan Pink. So that there's this idea, that this selfless idea, and that even our neuroscience, we're designed for this. We function a lot better when we're not like navel gazing, when our life isn't centered around ourselves.
And you think about that, right? How good does it feel when you give someone a gift, and that moment when they're opening it, and like, it's such a great feeling, right? And it's fun to get gifts, sure, but there's something, there's something just extra special about the giving. And so I just thought, like, as there was so much thinking about ourself and, hoarding, stuff, and just behaviors that were about almost survival instincts that were kicking in, right, during this beginning. 41 days in was really early still in
we
COVID.
thought it was very far in at the time.
I know. So it was just like when I heard that quote from Pope Francis, and then literally was listening to this session that Dan Pink was doing. Yeah. It was like all coming together, like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? And so that there's beauty in doing something for others, and also we get something from that, right? And so if we can just do more of that, what a beautiful place. And we can get through this. We can get through this.
I appreciate how you close that, and you kind of summarize that together. You say, talking about COVID, that moments like this are worthy of giving the best of ourselves to deeply reflect on. That integrates so many powerful things of mindfulness, of being present in the moment, even a love for others. That if it is all about us, well, is today any more important than yesterday? If we're not affected by COVID personally, right? But moments.
There's someone in that lives somewhere around here that around me that is every day she is out writing stuff on the sidewalks, and she calls herself the sidewalk poet. And I'll walk for 3 miles, and along the whole way there's different sayings, and she's changing them all the time. And I just am like this thing that she's doing is giving others this moment of wow, I really needed that today, And so, what is it costing her? Some chalk, right? And her time, which, is just like, it's, I don't know, these small things. It doesn't have to be grandiose, right? It can be something very small that's just like, you're thinking about, how can I bring joy into someone else's life?
And regardless of anyone, probably very few people that read that even know her name.
Probably no one. Yeah. Very few. Her maybe family, right?
How selfless that she gets to inspire and gift other people. She's not going to get famous. She has.
Nope. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. That's a great question that I think you lead us to in that blog post is, what are small moments that I might be called to lead in a selfless way, that I might, in my sphere of influence and my circles, my circle looks different. My work looks different, but how can I live in love, joy, generosity in whatever circle I might be in?
Yeah. I want to be in that world.
Yes. That's a world I want to co-create together. Yes. Cool. Any words of inspiration as we close off today that you want to leave our listeners with?
There's a quote that I absolutely love, and it's more of a question than a quote. And it's by a philosopher, Theodore Zeldin. And he asks, when will we create the same breakthroughs in the way we relate to one another as we have had in technology? And I have, the first time I heard that was, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years ago. And it has consumed me ever since, because you think about, I think there's 175,000 leadership books on Amazon, right? And companies are paying $1 billion a year on development, employee development, and things like that, right? And so you think about all of that, those resources that are being put against it, and we still are struggling with fundamental. The fundamentals of relating to one another. And we haven't moved the needle. We're still asking the same questions about leadership and all of that. And I just believe with every fiber of my being that the fact that the fields of leadership and the fields of neuroscience, this convergence of those fields is going to be the sort of tipping point, right, of when we start to break through on answering that question, right? Yeah. And I just think we're getting close on understanding how the brain's working and understanding some of these connections and what's actually happening when I'm dialoguing with you in your brain and my brain. And if I could understand that, we could fundamentally engage with each other in a way that is that brings us both value, right? And so I think I'll leave with we as practitioners and I think just people in general, we have an obligation to each other to recognize that this research is now emerging. And so we need to become part of it, whether it's becoming, actually actively being part of research or becoming part of it as a consumer of it and helping make this world that place that you were describing, right? By educating ourselves and then having it influence the way that we behave.
So good. That quote too, I've never heard that quote before. What if we invested in people with the energy, diligence, and resources that we invested in things?
Wouldn't it be amazing?
We'd have a totally different world. And of course, most of us at our core, we do believe that people matter more than things, but we don't invest in them similarly.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful challenge to all of us.
Oh, it's a wonderful challenge. And I love thinking about it. And I want to be part of the solution.
Yeah. So if people want to reach out to you, want to invite in psychological safety training, want to help manage a disruption or create a disruption in their workplace, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm on LinkedIn, Jennifer McKusker. That's McKusker, or you can go to my website at McKuskerConsulting.com and reach out to me through that. So
Perfect.
Either way, thank you.
And your book also on Amazon. So psychological safety on Amazon.
Psychological safety. Yeah.
All wonderful resources. So if you want to create disruption, if you want help managing disruption in your workplace, please reach out to Jennifer. This has been a great time chatting with you. I love this integrating IO psychology, neuroscience, pop culture, pop events, really, and mindfulness and all of this. A rich conversation. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you next week on the Momentum Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully you're managing well, staying safe, staying healthy. See you next Monday.